International Monetary Fund met with a team from government headed by Prime Minister Amor Mottley. The IMF team provided an update on the just concluded mission for the first review of the extended fund facility and the resilience and sustainability arrangements. We now bring you that full news conference held at government headquarters.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're very happy to be here, and we just concluded our mission for the first review of the Extended Fund Facility and Resilience and Sustainability arrangements that were approved by our board in December of last year. And I'm happy to report that after very productive discussions with the authorities, we have reached staff-level agreement to complete the first review of both arrangements. This is going to go to our executive board, expected in June, and that will make available to Barbados the corresponding amounts that for the first review of the arrangements. We are happy to see that the economy is recovering strongly after all the series of shocks that it suffered in the past few years. We saw that that tourism has recovered strongly, that GDP growth has grown for several quarters, and that the outlook for this year remains very strong with a continued expansion of the economy. We also see that international reserves are at very good levels, and that we see that the fiscal performance has improved very markedly last year, and the budget for this year is in line with the targets set under the BIRD program. We are also happy to see that the authorities keep on implementing the BIRD program. It's moving along, and the authorities are also implementing their ambitious strategy to build resilience to climate change and natural disasters, with a number of actions on adaptation having been taken, and a continued growth of the share of renewables in the energy matrix. So on this basis, we see a lot of encouraging developments, and we are very happy to continue supporting Barbados in achieving strong and inclusive growth and in meeting its climate policy goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pablo. And first of all, let me thank all of the members of the team who have worked assiduously for the last 2 weeks with the officials of the government of Barbados. As you have just heard, we have reached staff-level agreement, but more importantly, we do so from a position of strength and not one from where we started virtually 5 years ago. Ironically, we are 1 month shy of our first engagement 5 years ago, where we were going not because we chose to go, but we needed to go because our situation was such that we were the third most highly indebted country, debt per GDP per capita in the world. The story of the last 5 years has been most interesting, and I don't need to repeat it again this morning. Suffice it to say that we have now, as you've heard from the governor, as you've heard from Pablo, the first 8 consecutive quarters of growth, and we have also seen, for the very first time, the lowest unemployment since 2007. That is no small achievement. We've also seen a return to confidence, I should say, by the domestic banking institutions in the domestic capital markets. And I want to thank the new governor and the previous governor for working assiduously with the banks to bring back them to the table and to restore the confidence there. Inclusive growth was the phrase that you heard just now. It's not by accident. Anybody can show levels of growth once there's increased economic activity. We are not yet where we want to be, but what we've been able to do as a country is in this period of time not necessarily only bring and have the correct fiscal indices, not only prop up and stabilize our exchange rate, but we've also been able to ensure that Bajans have access to minimum wages. We've been able to put back and recapitalize the fleet in the Transport Board as we are continuing to do so. We've done it with the Sanitation Services Authority. We're doing literally the rebuilding that needs to be done in order to ensure the social capital stability that is necessary for us on 166 square miles. And we do all of this while at the same time seeking to create new opportunities for growth. Those new opportunities range from the renewable energy sector to us being able, as we said, to put in the early work to build out for Barbados a new pharmaceutical sector, to be able to build out the diversification of this economy through those things, as well as looking towards the establishment of a heritage economy, as well as looking towards ensuring that apart from the life sciences and the new food sciences terminal that we opened last November, that we also have a renewed purpose for agriculture and for manufacturing. The mission economy that we launched at the beginning of this month is intended to be the blueprint and the roadmap through which we say to all Barbadians, not just the government, not just the formal private sector, not just the labor movement, but all Barbadian households and civil society groups, that if we work together, the singular purpose, we can make it. We saw it happen with what we did to set out to save the dollar. We saw it happen with what we did to stabilize our journey with respect to COVID. We need to do it now to sustain the kind of growth that the country needs. Our housing program is pivotal to it. Our investments in renewable energy sector are pivotal to it. Our investments in training, because part of the difficulty that we have faced over the last few decades is that we have not sustained the level of strategic training in order to ensure that people are equal to the task that is required of them within the time frame and within the cost structures that are needed if we are literally to be competitive globally and to give people a reason for choosing Barbados over other countries. We do all of this against the backdrop of a climate crisis. And we do all of this against the vulnerability of more pandemics. But we believe that if we put in and continue the areas that we've been strengthening in terms of our public financial management, in terms of our institutional strengthening in the Ministry of Health, in terms of our institutional strengthening in education and training, in terms of our governance review and the constitutional reviews that are taking place, that we can reposition this country to secure its future for the next 2 to 3 decades. What we do in the next few years, what we do between now and 2030, will make sure that the country has the capacity to be able to withstand what is likely to continue to be a period of great instability globally. So I thank you for coming. I thank the officers for being able to have the engagement with our own officials and to ensure that we use this as but another building block. As I said, we are not near the destination. And our destination is to be world-class by 2030 in a number of key areas. So you may well call this halfway. And the halfway, hopefully, will be a little less cumbersome and onerous than the last few years, largely because of our ability to build up the resilience that we have done and having had to go through some of the most terrible challenges since independence. I ask Barbadians, we don't expect all on board, but we expect the majority on board for this journey. And why? Because it is us who benefits, and it is us who will sustain a better future for our people and our children. Will there be some difficulties along the way? Yes, there will be. But we will deal with them and fix them as they confront us. We hope that the price of energy in the interim will continue to be one that will not explode upon us. But as you can already see, Our prices are not facing the same level of inflationary pressure as they did a year to 18 months ago. And for that, we are grateful. But I think the country has the confidence, as do all who watch our performance, that even when we have to take actions to protect our people, we know how to bring it back to ensure that we are stable for the medium to long term. So if there are any questions before we wrap up, thank you.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Colville, Manzi Nation News. If I may touch quickly on the issue of the rising interest rates globally, that is actually affecting Barbados' interest payments as well. Is this likely to
all countries?
And all countries as
right.
well. Is this likely to impact the long-term program itself, given the fact that these payments have risen? And also, the Prime Minister's earlier argument put forward somewhat of a bit of a moral suasion to have some sort of...
Is it an argument? I didn't know it was arguing.
Somewhat of a moral suasion to have, I don't know if is it likely to hold water in terms of maybe having some built-in mechanism to shield vulnerable countries like Barbados from an occurrence of this in the long term?
I assume that you were trying to ask Pablo, but it's a surreal experience because you're asking him whether my argument will hold water internationally. So let me help you translate it for him. He wants you to tell him whether the interest rate increases will destabilize countries, and if they do destabilize countries, how best can we adjust to it? Is that correct? Correct. Pablo?
Thank you for your question. So, as you mentioned, the rise in interest rates is affecting every country in the world. Now, this rise in interest rates is factored in our financial programming, and our projections show that with the program as it stands, the Barbados can achieve its long-term public debt reduction as envisaged in the program.
And let me help you know. Because your questions are motivated also by those who have a political axe to grind. And it is important that I address this. When people take things out of context, it can mean anything to everybody, anybody. The reality is that when I spoke in Washington, I was not speaking on behalf of Barbados alone. I was speaking on behalf of those countries, 52 of which are now on debt row. In our instance, we chose to go back to the IMF for this second program for two fundamental reasons. One, that the global economic uncertainty was such that, in our view, you needed to have access to the cheapest interest rates for capital and development. And two, that we needed to ensure that in so doing, that we could also access the resilience and sustainability trust, quite frankly, which is critical because it is 20-year money with a 10-year moratorium at very affordable interest rates. Now, if you believe that the cost of interest rates have gone up with the IMF and World Bank and IDB as they have, imagine how much more they've gone up on the open market. And it is for those countries on the open market also that the greatest threat has come. With respect to my comments in DC, it was simply to say, as part of the Bridgetown Initiative and as part of the overall reform that we're asking for, is that even if you have a situation where countries have variable interest rates, that international financial institutions and development banks ought to have a range within which the interest rates will float, rather than it being left to the vagaries of the markets. And the reality is that it is an argument that is not only holding water, but gaining acceptability. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have that range, the capacity to throw a country completely out of whack is exactly there. So, and I want us to also go back to why we are facing high inflation. Some countries in the world that told us that you cannot print money and that you should not print money chose, in fact, to do quantitative easing, which is the effective equivalent of printing money. The printing that they did was in the trillions all of these Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, all of this injection of capital into the American economy obviously would have had inflationary impacts, especially at a time when labor was becoming more and more restricted because of the pandemic. And you've heard me this week talk about the absence of numbers within the hospitality industry globally. The consequence of that was to drive inflation. And the consequence of it is for the rest of us globally to face the same challenges. So that we have, as a global community, not to accept things as they are or as they were, but to deconstruct and reconstruct. And that is all we have been trying to do with the Bridgetown Initiative 2.0. But if there are those whose only hope for success is to distort comments and to take them out of context, I can only pray for them rather than preach against them.
All right, I have another question again for the IMF delegation and for the Prime Minister. It's a two-part question. Firstly, as it relates to the SOEs, which is an integral part of this second board program, Madam Prime Minister, could you give us an update as to where we are at with the reform of those SOEs? And to the IMF delegation, are you happy where we are at with that component of the program?
Thank you. I've said to the country in the budget in March that we are well on our way with respect to all of them. The reality is that Bajans understand the metaphor of dominoes. You don't pull a hand in dominoes and skin it up at the same time. The government has a policy framework for each of these state-owned enterprises, and they are at different stages of consultation, either with the industrial partners that we have in terms of the labor movement, or in some instances with the stakeholders in the particular sector. Up to Wednesday, I spent 5 hours with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, going through things that we can do to streamline the expenditure, and we'll meet with them again to look at streamlining its further capital program. The Mass Transit Authority and the Transport Board is well on the way in terms of its planning. The Barbados Agricultural Management Company and the repurposing and restructuring of our sugar industry. I've made it clear how many times in this room, plus outside of this room, that the government of Barbados cannot sustain the subsidization of the sugar industry, and therefore what is coming before us is a program that looks at the different investors and stakeholders that will help us use renewable energy in order to be able to take the liability of sugar off the taxpayers of this country, as it has been on for over 50 years and over $1 billion and counting. With respect to the CBC, we know that there are deep in negotiations with respect to a purchaser, and once again, I'm not going to compromise those discussions by speaking publicly to things. My duty is not to be able to ensure that you know every single detail along the journey. My duty is to make sure that we get to the point safely. We were well on our way in 2018 and 2019, as you know, and a number of entities had been reformed, and then we had to pause literally in 2020, 21, 22. The biggest victim of that pause was the Transport Board, and there's no doubt about it. Why? Because the public emergency restrictions precluded the level of density on traveling buses that would have allowed it to maintain itself with the increased bus fares that we had at the time. As a result, we now literally had to start back from scratch late last year in terms of the repurposing of that. It is our judgment that we should finish most of them over the course of the next 12 months. As to which ones come first and which ones come last, and the sequencing, rest assured that in the good old Bajan saying, you can hide and buy land, but you can't hide and work it. So you don't have to wonder where the state-owned enterprise reform is going to end up, because it has to be public knowledge, if only because we have to engage with labor and we have to engage with the other stakeholders that are affecting it. So I'm reasonably happy with the progress that we're making, but I would also tell you that I have my ministers and the SOEs on a very tight timeline, and that they are under pressure to maintain that, because we don't want to sustain that effort well beyond 2024.
Thank you very much. So to answer your question, yes, we received the authorities explained as the Prime Minister just did how the plans the reform plans are coming along, and this is in line with the BIRD program. So yes, I think it's in line what has been set under the BIRD program, and in any case, it's not for this review; it's for a future review. But yes, we are satisfied and encouraged by what we heard.
Once again, I thank you for voicing the concerns of the opposition. But I want to tell you, because I'm very careful and I see how people are trying to make an issue out of something that is part of a normal process. And you don't just wake up and have SOE reform because I say it. You're talking about institutions that have been in existence in some instances for more than 50 years. And they require, therefore, careful deconstruction and reconstruction, because it is not about a game or an exam. It is about people's lives, and it is about ensuring that services continue to be delivered, even if not in the exact way that it has been delivered over the course of the last 50 years. Okay? Any more questions? Yes, ma'am. You may have to come forward and stand up, or come forward and sit down, one or two. Good afternoon, my dear. Thank you.
Prime Minister, as we are speaking about growth, and you outlined several different industries, I was wondering, as we also have capital projects in the pipeline, can you give us an update as to...
Once again, there are tons of projects in the pipeline, but I'm not going to get into the business of exciting people and headlines. You know, I told my cabinet a few months ago, I do not want to come to the groundbreakings, I'm coming to openings. You understand? Because I understand that at this stage now, do not get distracted. Just finish the job. And therefore, whether it is the commencement of projects that started late last year that you can see, you see the crane on Hastings Main Road, whether it's the showroom that you see down the road, whether it is I'm meeting with investors from the Royalton next week who are flying in, the Marriott investors were in, we are doing the geriatric hospital, we are in the midst of our housing program. I can go literally, the Pendry Hotel finished the underground tunnel, which would link the properties in order for them to start their investment, whether it is the application for the new sugar bond, for the sugar bond to be turned in to an entity that will look to provide animal feed and to provide competition to Roberts so that we can have more competitive prices with respect to our agricultural people, whether it is the signing off of the complex at Lears, that effectively is what we talk about when we talk about the Barbados Guyana Food Terminal. All of these things are well and on stream. And in fact, when I met with the Growth Council, I'm happy to report that Mr. Doddridge Miller has agreed to serve as chair of the Growth Council. And on that council is also Sir Roy Trotman, Dr. Arnold McIntyre, Mr. Nicholas Brathwaite, who is a distinguished Caribbean person in Silicon Valley with a major hedge fund with investments in over 200 companies that are cutting edge technologically wise. Ms. Shelley Williams, who is chairman of the BTMI, Senator Andrew Malalou, they have all agreed to serve, and Mr. John Williams, who is chair of Invest Barbados as well, from the Cave Shepherd group of companies. They've all agreed to serve to help us do what? Promote the opportunities for projects, help us be able to close things where necessary, and to help us identify the obstacles so that Barbados delivers as they promised early in the year when we spoke to the country, but we're in a position to do that. So I will ask that Senior Minister Duguid, who's in charge of the infrastructure, periodically give updates to the country, probably every quarter, but suffice it to say that my problem now is identifying new areas of land for people who want to invest. And we've reached that stage. And that's why I keep saying, and that we've reached a stage now where training and doubling down on training and institutional reform is what is going to carry us the extra way. And then we have the very difficult conversations as well that have been being led by the Population Commission, because at the end of the day, if you don't have people, where you don't have, where you gonna have? So we, I'm happy to get Senior Minister give you the list of projects that are before the planning department at the different levels that they are. But I don't want my office to be associated with promising. I want to give you proven. Any more? I want to thank everybody then, and to say to you that hopefully this is the first time I feel as though we're almost back to normal. And we went through a period of time with our engagements with the IMF, as you know, where this was no longer a feature. As I said, we are here now not because we have to be here, but because when we looked around, this was the best option for us in a globally economic uncertain environment. And I'm still convinced that it is. And I want to thank the officials for working with us. The changes and the reforms that we are doing are homegrown, but they are for the benefit of this country. As I said, we inherited a government where, for the most part, the country was operating on fumes. And the things that we used to do in the way in which we used to do them could no longer be sustained, particularly in the state-owned enterprises. And I'm happy that we have been able to find partners in development that have allowed us to be able to shape our future differently. So thank you, and everybody have a good weekend. And I urge those who are visiting us to remember that we have some amenities called perhaps the best ocean in the world. And I'm told that you have not had a chance to get in it. Please make some time this afternoon and go into the sea and know why it is that Barbados has the highest repeat visitor factor in the region. Thank you very much.